This is Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh with Vladimir Putin during his visit to India in 2012 for the 13th annual Russia-India summit. And here's Putin again in 2014, in 2015, and again in 2016, this time with Prime Minister Modi. The close relationship between Russia and India was a carefully orchestrated alliance established more than 20 years ago. It was based on a mutual interest of regional growth and counterbalancing another global power. But these last 2 decades have also been slowly chipping away at this now very fragile friendship. Here's how. To understand this relationship, we need to take a look at its history. India was searching for alliances as it faced growing military threat from Pakistan, which was supported by the West. Additionally, in the 1950s and 60s, there was a looming threat from China.
India appealed for help, and the only great power that was willing to support India was the Soviet Union. There was a very broad alliance composed of these 3 elements. One was ideological affinity, probably least important, but still. The second was economic aid and cooperation. And then probably the most important and the most significant was military supplies and military cooperation. The Indian army almost entirely relied on Soviet weapons. Soviet Union was in a serious conflict, ideological and geopolitical conflict with China, so it was happy to support India.
That strategic friendship lasted until the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. India's relationship with the West was also shifting towards economic reforms, and both countries were no longer interested in continuing the relationship in its previous form. That is, until Russia's newly elected president, Vladimir Putin. In the year 2000, Putin visits India as one of his key partners in Russia's Asia policy. The countries establish what is known as the Strategic Partnership, and its most important element were these annual summits held alternately in both countries.
If you look at this from the point of view of Moscow, in the early years of the 21st century, India was an ideal partner. It was the only big power with which Russia had completely compatible interests. There was no differences on any significant issue. When President Putin began his third term as president in 2012, he specifically proclaimed so-called turn to the east of the Russian foreign policy. So again, India was one of the 2 partners that Russia tried to develop relations with as a part of this strategy. The first, of course, was China. So also in a subtle way, the relationship with India was supposed to balance the relationship with China. This is a kind of typical geopolitical thinking that's characteristic of the way that Russian elites think about international relations. This was a kind of a model relationship that Russia had and developed with India.
The partnership seemed equally beneficial for India. They too wanted to level up as a regional power and additionally approached Russia through the sentimental lens of the Cold War alliance. But one element loomed over the relationship throughout these 2 decades. The economic cooperation between the 2 countries never really took off. Take a look at this chart. It shows India's imports from Russia, China, and the US. See, Russia doesn't even come close to the volume of trade of the United States or even China. And here's India's export to these same countries. And again, Russia trails behind these other nations.
If you look at the statistics, that relationship was not very important economically, neither for Russia nor for India. Less than 1% of their foreign trade volume for economies of this size is not really serious.
The only cooperation that seemed to be working was the military and arms support. Still in 2017, 70% of India's military technology was based on Russian production. In 2019, a joint production of Kalashnikov rifles in India was established, and a year earlier, a contract was signed for Russia to deliver the S-400 mobile surface-to-air missile system.
It was symbolic in the sense that before that, Russia sold similar systems to China, so now selling them to India somehow demonstrated Russia was preserving some elements of equal distance between these two important partners, China and India.
But even those deals didn't seem to keep up the significance of the alliance. Russia continued to grow closer to China, and while India at first tried to slow down this process, it eventually focuses on developing a strategic relationship with the US.
And this strategic relationship with US has really developed after 2008, and it has actually two aspects. One is purely military and strategic, and this is what's kind of the most obvious, and that's what's worrying the Russian side most of all. And by the way, the Russian side has become quite open in its criticism of this, which is kind of unusual, because this criticism is not taken very lightly in India. Because it shows certain condescension towards India, which the Indian elite resents. India really launched, under Modi, serious drive towards economic development on the basis of high technologies. It's clear that Russia cannot provide anything that's even close. The relationship with America is now vital to India, whereas the relationship with Russia is important only in one very narrow section, namely arms supply.
Russia's full-scale invasion on Ukraine was the most recent stress test for the strategic partnership. When the West introduced sanctions on Russia, India didn't join the initiative, and it didn't condemn Russia for the attack. In just a few months, it became one of the biggest importers of discounted Russian oil and other goods. On the surface, it seemed like the relationship got stronger, but on closer inspection, that was not the case.
What is significant, Vladimir Putin did not come to visit India, and Prime Minister Modi also stopped visiting Russia. So after 2002, the ritual and actually formal obligation of annual visits by leaders of the two countries, which lasted, this ritual lasted without a break since 2000. So every year there was a visit. After February 2022, this was discontinued. Prime Minister Modi met with Putin only on neutral grounds on the Shanghai Cooperation Summit meeting in Uzbekistan in 2022. And by the way, implicitly or sort of subtly criticized Russia's decision to go to war against Ukraine. The military agreements of 2021 were not implemented by India. They are in a suspended state. Because of the war, we now know that there are cases of Russian firms not supplying spare parts to Indian military equipment, and on this symbolic contract for S-400 anti-aircraft air defense missiles, there has been delays. The third batch of the supplies of the missiles that was supposed to be delivered was delayed. There were also problems with payment due to the sanctioning of Russian banks. And even on this economic bonanza that happened with the sale of large amounts of Russian oil to India, there are negative aspects of it, because Russia agreed to accept payment in rupees to avoid dollars. But rupee is not a convertible currency. So now several billion worth of rupees are on Russian firms' accounts in Indian banks.
As Russia is increasingly isolated on the international scene, it grows even more reliant on its relationship with both India and with China.
This growing rapprochement, growing closeness between Russia and China really means that the relations with India is going to become more and more difficult. Also, with the worsening of American-Chinese and Indian-Chinese relationship, this is going to impact negatively Russian-Indian relationship, which is not likely to recover. Quite on the contrary, it's probably going to be less and less close, especially in strategic terms.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe to never miss more stories like this one from the region.